Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to briefly say something about practical education. About 30,000 students are enrolled there. All of these are very important programs, for example, to learn how to do bricklaying or to become a chef. And I actually have a similar point that has already been made a few times, but I would like to make it in my own way as well about that promising advising, because it leads to, according to the sector itself, that students who would actually be best suited for practical education are instead advised to go to pre-vocational secondary education, VMBO. And then it doesn't fit. And then in the end, they end up transferring anyway, not graduating, but transferring to practical education. And of course, with an unpleasant experience. So that promising advising, that does indeed seem, it has already been said a few times. So we also don't think that's a good thing. I'd also like to ask the State Secretary something fundamental about that promising advice I mentioned. But what does promising actually mean? So then you're talking about cognitive skills. That's everything that's taken into account there. And that's really the whole discussion. Highly educated, less educated, which fortunately has now become theoretical and practical. Yes, I would almost want to turn it around by now. I've once said in a debate, a bit sarcastically, but I do mean it, that highly educated just means more educated. I honestly don't think you need to be proud of it these days if you're highly educated. I also genuinely believe that people who are really skilled at something, like carpenters, for example, I actually value that more. Yes, and they often get paid well too. There's also often a huge shortage of them. So I really don't understand that way of thinking at all with so-called opportunity-rich people, that everything has to be theoretical. So maybe the State Secretary could say something about that and what could replace it. And then one more comment about those international transition classes. This has also been discussed a few times already, because I understand that practical education is also affected by this. That is, students who do not yet have a good command of the language, for example, Ukrainian refugees, they are apparently being parked in practical education. But they don't belong there, and it is very disruptive. And maybe that, and by the way, you also see the pressure that all these refugee issues put on education. So not just on the housing market, but on all our facilities. But that's beside the point. But I am curious to know how the State Secretary views this, because it also puts extra pressure on this type of education, practical education. And finally, I would like to make a brief comment about sick leave, because among teaching staff, it is highest in practical education. And I would like to thank the State Secretary for that. We discussed this during the debate. We received the figures from DUO via the State Secretary regarding sick leave in primary education. And as you can see, this is a favorite point of mine, but I wanted to keep emphasizing it again and again. The larger the school board is in primary education, as shown by these figures, the greater the chance that a teacher will become ill. And of course, that's a correlation, not causation, but it does show something because it's quite a significant effect. It makes a difference of 25%. And couldn't that also be the case in practical education? That's the question I have, and I think it could actually be investigated relatively quickly, because as I understand it, there are still 10 schools in practical education. These are so-called one-pitters, and we think that's a very good thing. In those cases, the school board coincides with the school itself. So we really have a problem with those large school boards. A lot has gone wrong there. We could have an entire debate about that, and my hypothesis would be that perhaps with those 10 one-pitters, things like absenteeism, but also turnover, or perhaps another indicator, are actually better there. Of course, I could be mistaken, but that can easily be looked into, and that's actually a question I have for the State Secretary. Could they look at those 10 schools to see how they compare, those 10 practical education schools compared to the rest of practical education? Because my suspicion would be that those school boards also actually have a negative effect. Those large school boards that merge everything together, that has of course been a disaster for the entire education system, and whether that also played a role, for example, with absenteeism due to illness. So those were my points.